The diplomatic vessel of the Viridian Collective materialized in Earth's orbital space with a kind of casual superiority that came from centuries of unchallenged galactic dominance. Ambassador Krellmax observed the blue-green planet through the crystalline viewscreen, his six-segmented appendages twitching with a mixture of professional detachment and barely concealed contempt. Humanity was, by all Viridian standards, utterly unremarkable. A young species clustered on a single planetary system, barely capable of rudimentary interplanetary exploration. Their technological achievements were primitive, their social structures fragmented, their potential for galactic integration minimal at best. The preliminary scans confirmed everything Krellmax had expected. Primitive communication networks, rudimentary energy production, weapon systems that would barely register as more than minor irritations to a properly shielded Viridian vessel. Their entire civilization could be integrated or eliminated with less effort than it took to process a standard diplomatic report. Lieutenant Zora, Krellmax's primary data analyst, projected holographic representations of Earth's major population centers. Recommendation is Standard Protocol 7 Gamma, she reported, her translation implant converting her native clicking language into crisp, emotionless Standard Galactic. Minimal resistance anticipated. Complete submission probability, 99.8%. What neither Krellmax nor Lieutenant Zora understood was the fundamental miscalculation at the heart of their assessment. Humanity was not just another species to be cataloged and controlled. They were something far more dangerous. The initial communication burst was sent with the same bureaucratic efficiency the Viridian Collective had used for thousands of planetary integrations. A standard transmission, encoded with linguistic protocols that had subdued hundreds of civilizations before. The message was straightforward. Surrender your planetary resources, accept Viridian governance, and prepare for immediate cultural assimilation. In the United Nations Emergency Command Center, the response was anything but standard. Dr. Elena Rodriguez leaned back, a sardonic smile playing across her lips. She had spent her entire career studying potential extraterrestrial contact scenarios, and this was simultaneously everything and nothing like her predictions. "They think we're going to roll over," she said to Major Jack Harper, who was studying the alien transmission with the intensity of a predator analyzing prey. Harper's response was typically military. Let them think that. The global reaction was a symphony of controlled chaos. Unlike the fractured responses the Viridians had anticipated, humanity responded with a cohesion that would have been impossible just decades earlier. National boundaries seemed to dissolve. Scientific institutions that had once competed now shared resources with unprecedented speed. Military strategists from every continent began collaborative planning sessions that would have been unimaginable a generation ago. What the Viridian Collective didn't realize was that humanity had been preparing for this moment, not through advanced weaponry or complex defensive systems, but through something far more fundamental: adaptability, creativity, an almost pathological inability to accept predetermined limitations. Krellmax would later reflect that the first warning should have been the response itself. Instead of terror or immediate submission, the human communication was curious, analytical, almost excited. They didn't sound like a species about to be conquered. They sounded like a species preparing to do the conquering. The Viridian transmission arrived with the clinical precision of a bureaucratic decree. Standard Galactic Protocol 12 Epsilon. Total planetary surrender. Complete resource allocation. Immediate cultural recalibration. The countdown was set -72 standard galactic hours for humanity to comply. Ambassador Krellmax watched the transmission with the detached confidence of a species that had subjugated hundreds of civilizations. The holographic display showed Earth's geographical layout, resource concentrations marked in pulsing algorithmic patterns. Red zones indicated potential resistance points. Blue zones mapped out optimal extraction regions. It was a map of conquest, not negotiation. In the United Nations Emergency Command Center, Major Jack Harper studied the alien ultimatum with a glacial intensity that would have unnerved the Viridian observers had they been present. Beside him, Dr. Elena Rodriguez was less still, her fingers dancing across multiple holographic interfaces, correlating data at a speed that would have impressed even the most advanced Viridian analysts. "They're treating us like a resource," Rodriguez muttered, her voice a mixture of academic fascination and pure fury. "Not as a sentient civilization, as a planetary asset to be cataloged and consumed." Harper's response was characteristic in its brevity. Not going to happen. The global response was anything but fractured. Within hours of the Viridian transmission, something unprecedented occurred. Every major technological institution, every research facility, every military research division began sharing information with a level of coordination that defied traditional geopolitical boundaries. In Silicon Valley, quantum computing teams collaborated with Beijing's advanced materials research groups. NASA worked alongside the European Space Agency with a synchronicity that would have been impossible a decade earlier. Military strategists from countries that had been traditional rivals now shared encrypted communication channels as if they were a single, unified organism. The Viridian Collective had a critical blind spot. They understood technological superiority, but they fundamentally misunderstood the concept of human adaptability. Lieutenant Zora, analyzing the initial human response patterns, made a fatal error in her initial report. Probability of unified resistance, 2.3%, her report stated. Recommended integration strategy, standard pacification protocols. What she failed to calculate was the human capacity for improvisation. Dr. Rodriguez had discovered something in the initial transmission that made her smile, a subtle quantum encryption pattern that the Viridians believed was unbreakable. To the Viridian Collective, it was a standard communication security measure. To Dr. Rodriguez, it was an opportunity. "They've given us exactly what we need to understand their entire communication infrastructure," she told the assembled global strategic team. The room, filled with the most brilliant minds from every continent, went silent. Major Harper leaned forward. "Explain." Rodriguez's explanation was both simple and revolutionary. The quantum encryption, designed to be unbreakable, contained inherent structural weaknesses that only a species willing to completely reimagine communication protocols could exploit. The Viridians had created the perfect puzzle, and humanity was about to solve it in a way they could never anticipate. The 72-hour countdown wasn't a limitation for humanity. It was an opportunity. As the first 24 hours passed, the Viridian Collective continued to prepare for what they believed would be a standard planetary integration. They reviewed historical data, calculated resource extraction methodologies, prepared standard pacification protocols. They had no idea what was coming. The underground research facility beneath the Atacama Desert was humanity's most closely guarded secret. Not even the United Nations knew its full extent. A deliberate choice made by a consortium of scientists, military strategists, and technological innovators who had been preparing for an eventuality that most considered pure science fiction. Dr. Elena Rodriguez walked the gleaming corridors, her footsteps echoing against walls lined with technologies that defied conventional understanding. Here, the boundaries between theoretical physics, quantum mechanics, and what some would call magic blurred into something entirely new. Dr. Marcus Chen, head of Quantum Systems Integration, looked up from a holographic display that seemed to shimmer between multiple dimensional states. "They have no idea," he said, not as a boast, but as a simple statement of fact. The facility represented decades of covert global collaboration. When the world believed nations were competing, they were actually building something unprecedented. Climate research facilities in Antarctica shared quantum entanglement data with particle physicists in CERN. Deep-sea research stations in the Pacific exchanged encrypted information with satellite networks. Every seemingly isolated technological breakthrough was a carefully placed piece of a much larger puzzle. Major Jack Harper reviewed the initial strategic assessments. The Viridian Collective's transmission had provided more than just a communication challenge. It was a roadmap to their technological vulnerabilities. Their quantum communication network, Harper explained to the assembled team, is actually a complex hierarchical system with inherent structural weaknesses. They've optimized for efficiency at the cost of adaptability. Dr. Rodriguez expanded the holographic display. What appeared to be a complex web of interconnected nodes was actually a remarkably rigid communication infrastructure. They've spent millennia perfecting a system that assumes technological superiority, she noted, which means they've never had to develop true adaptive capabilities. The human response was being crafted with a level of creativity that would baffle the Viridian analysts. Instead of developing direct counter-technologies, the teams were designing adaptive systems that could fundamentally rewrite the rules of engagement. In the quantum computing section, researchers had developed communication protocols that could simultaneously exist in multiple states, a direct challenge to the Viridians' linear communication models. Military strategists were preparing psychological warfare techniques that went beyond traditional understanding, leveraging insights from fields as diverse as anthropology, neuroscience, and cultural studies. Dr. Chen demonstrated a prototype communication disruptor that didn't just block signals, it could potentially rewrite them in real time. It's not about stopping their communication, he explained. It's about making their communication work against them. The facility was more than a research center. It was a testament to human potential, a place where the impossible was merely a problem waiting to be solved. Major Harper understood something the Viridian Collective had completely missed. Humanity's greatest strength wasn't in any single technological breakthrough. It was in their ability to collaborate, to improvise, to see potential where others saw only limitations. As the final preparations were made, there was no sense of fear, only a collective anticipation, the calm before a storm that the Viridian Collective could never hope to comprehend. The 72-hour countdown continued, and humanity was ready. Not just ready to resist, ready to redefine the very concept of resistance. The first Viridian assault wave arrived with the clinical precision of a military operation that had been perfected over millennia. 12 primary assault vessels, each the size of a small city, materialized in Earth's orbital space. Their energy signatures alone would have been enough to vaporize most civilizations' defensive capabilities. Ambassador Krelnax watched the tactical display with the detached confidence of a species that had conquered hundreds of worlds. The human defense systems looked primitive. A scattered array of satellites, a few orbital platforms, and what appeared to be laughably inadequate planetary defense networks. "Initiate standard pacification protocol," Krelnax commanded. The words were almost a formality, a bureaucratic requirement before planetary submission. What happened next would be studied by xenostrategists for generations. The first indication that something was wrong came through a subtle quantum communication disruption. Lieutenant Zara's initial warning was more confusion than concern. Targeting systems experiencing unexpected quantum interference, she reported. The human response was anything but conventional. Instead of presenting a solid defensive line, Earth's orbital assets seemed to dissolve. Satellites appeared to scatter, breaking traditional defensive formations. The Viridian targeting systems, designed to lock onto solid, predictable defensive structures, found themselves tracking what seemed like random movement. Major Jack Harper's voice was calm as he coordinated the initial response. "Phase 1, he said simply. Dr. Elena Rodriguez watched the tactical display, a subtle smile playing across her lips. The scattered orbital assets weren't running. They were transforming. What the Viridian Collective didn't understand was that humanity had reimagined the very concept of defensive technology. The satellites weren't just communication and observation platforms. They were adaptive, interconnected systems that could reconfigure themselves in milliseconds. The first Viridian assault craft to fire its primary weapon discovered the true nature of human innovation. Instead of a direct energy impact, its targeting beam passed through what appeared to be empty space, only to be reflected back by a network of quantum-entangled mirror satellites. Beam redirection at 287% efficiency, Dr. Chen reported from the underground command center. Targeting systems compromised. Ambassador Krelnax watched in growing disbelief as the first assault wave found its own weapons being used against it. The precise, hierarchical attack formation began to break down. Viridian vessels that had never known true combat uncertainty began to make increasingly erratic movements. Psychological warfare wasn't just a human strategy. It was becoming a technological reality. The orbital engagement wasn't a battle in any traditional sense. It was a demonstration of fundamentally different approaches to technological conflict. Where the Viridians saw rigid systems and predictable responses, humans saw an opportunity for complete reimagination. 3 Viridian assault vessels were destroyed not by conventional weapons, but by their own redirected energy systems. Another 2 found their quantum communication networks completely compromised, rendering them unable to coordinate with the main fleet. As the first hour of engagement concluded, the Viridian Collective faced a reality they had never conceived possible. The humans weren't just resisting. They were rewriting the entire methodology of space warfare. Ambassador Krelnax's final transmission of that engagement was a single, uncharacteristic word that translated roughly to impossible in standard Galactic. The 72-hour countdown continued, and humanity was just getting started. The news spread through galactic communication networks faster than light itself, a conceptual wave of disbelief, curiosity, and growing unease. The Viridian Collective, long considered the most dominant force in known space, was being challenged by a species that wasn't supposed to matter. In the grand communication hub of the Galactic Consortium, holographic displays flickered with unprecedented transmission data. Representatives from over 200 sentient species watched, transfixed, as the preliminary reports from the Earth engagement continued to stream in. Zerakal, a diplomatic observer from the Metherian Cooperative, leaned forward in her crystalline communication pod. Her species had been subjugated by the Viridian Collective centuries ago, their own resistance crushed with clinical efficiency. Now something extraordinary was happening. "Replay the orbital engagement sequence," she requested, her translation implant converting her complex molecular communication into standard auditory language. The recording showed something that defied everything known about interstellar conflict. Humans weren't just defending. They were innovating in real time, turning the Viridians' own technological superiority into a weapon against them. On the distant world of Cronus Prime, a group of researchers from the Resistance Archives began compiling what would become known as the Human Anomaly Database. Every transmission, every fragment of data was analyzed with growing fascination. Dr. Lian Shen, the lead archivist, a hybrid descendant of multiple subjugated species, understood the significance immediately. "This isn't just a battle," she told her team. "This is a fundamental challenge to everything we understand about technological hierarchy." The Viridian Collective's internal communication networks began to show the first signs of stress. Centuries of unquestioned superiority were being challenged by a species that wasn't supposed to be capable of meaningful resistance. Ambassador Krelnax's emergency transmission to the Viridian High Council revealed more than just tactical information. It betrayed something far more dangerous: uncertainty. "The humans are not following any known strategic paradigm," his report read. "Their technological adaptability suggests capabilities beyond our current understanding." Recommendation: immediate comprehensive threat reassessment. Across the galaxy, species that had long been under Viridian control began to watch with a mixture of hope and caution. The Metherian Cooperative, the Cronus Collaborative, the scattered remnants of a dozen conquered civilizations, all found their communication channels subtly redirected to monitor the unfolding conflict. What was happening wasn't just a battle. It was a potential revolution. The most fascinating aspect wasn't the human technological innovation. It was their psychological approach. Where other species saw the Viridian Collective as an insurmountable force, humans saw a complex system waiting to be understood and disrupted. Dr. Elena Rodriguez, monitoring the galactic communication networks from the underground facility, understood the deeper implications. "They're not just watching a conflict," she told Major Jack Harper. "They're witnessing a complete reimagining of interstellar conflict." Harper's response was characteristically concise. "Good." As the 72-hour countdown continued, the galaxy held its collective breath. The Viridian Collective was facing something it had never encountered in millennia of galactic dominance. A species that refused to be defined by anyone's limitations but its own. The underground command center hummed with an energy that defied traditional military protocol. Dr. Elena Rodriguez stood before a holographic display that was less a tactical map and more a living, breathing representation of interstellar conflict. "We're not just fighting," she explained to the assembled team of scientists, military strategists, and communication experts. "We're conducting a comprehensive systems analysis of an entire galactic civilization." Major Jack Harper studied the intricate web of quantum-entangled communication pathways that Dr. Rodriguez had mapped. What looked like chaos to the untrained eye was actually a meticulously constructed vulnerability matrix. The Viridian Collective's communication infrastructure, which had been their greatest strength for millennia, was about to become their fatal weakness. Dr. Marcus Chen approached with a data crystal that seemed to pulse with its own internal light. "We've developed a communication virus," he said, "but virus is too simplistic a term. It's more of a conceptual disruption algorithm." The plan was audacious in its simplicity and complexity. Humanity would not attempt to destroy the Viridian communication network. Instead, they would fundamentally alter its understanding of itself. The first stage began with what appeared to be a series of random satellite deployments. To the Viridian tracking systems, these looked like scattered defensive preparations. In reality, each satellite was a complex quantum relay designed to introduce specific cognitive dissonance into the Viridian communication matrices. Ambassador Krelnax received the first indication that something was fundamentally wrong when routine communication protocols began to return unexpected responses. It was subtle at first, minor discrepancies in tactical reporting, slight variations in standard communication algorithms. "Run a full diagnostic," he commanded Lieutenant Zora, a hint of uncertainty creeping into his usually clinical tone. What the Viridians didn't understand was that humans had spent decades studying complex systems theory, neural network adaptability, and the fundamental nature of communication itself. The attack wasn't physical. It was conceptual. Each quantum-entangled satellite acted like a neural synapse, introducing small but critical variations into the Viridian communication network. It was less an invasion and more a form of technological acupuncture, precisely targeted disruptions that would cause systemic recalibration. The Matherian Communication Archives would later describe it as the most sophisticated psychological warfare ever conceived in known space. It wasn't about destroying the Viridian infrastructure. It was about making them question the very foundation of their technological superiority. Dr. Rodriguez watched the holographic display with a mixture of scientific fascination and strategic precision. "We're not breaking their system," she explained to Harper. "We're teaching it to break itself." Strategic centers across the Viridian Collective began to experience unexplainable communication drift. Tactical assessments became increasingly erratic. The rigid hierarchical structure that had been their greatest strength was now becoming their most significant vulnerability. 3 Viridian communication hubs went offline within minutes, not through direct attack, but through a form of technological cognitive dissonance that seemed to defy conventional understanding. 72 hours, Major Harper muttered, looking at the countdown timer. "We're ahead of schedule." As the galactic community watched in growing amazement, humanity was demonstrating something far more profound than military superiority. They were showing that true power lies not in technological might, but in the ability to understand, adapt, and fundamentally reimagine complex systems. The turning point wasn't a battle. It was a revolution of thought. The Viridian Collective's central command structure began to collapse from within, a process both terrifyingly rapid and meticulously orchestrated. What had once been a monolithic civilization of unquestioned technological supremacy now resembled a complex system experiencing catastrophic systems failure. Ambassador Krellmax watched in growing horror as communication protocols he had trusted for centuries began to fragment. The quantum disruption wasn't just affecting external communications, it was penetrating the very core of Viridian's societal infrastructure. On the bridge of the primary command vessel, Lieutenant Zora experienced the first true moment of individual thought in her entire existence. The rigid hierarchical programming that had defined Viridian consciousness for millennia began to crack, revealing something unexpected. Choice. Dr. Elena Rodriguez monitored the unfolding scenario from the underground command center, her fingers dancing across holographic interfaces that seemed to pulse with living intelligence. "It's not about destruction," she explained to Major Jack Harper. "It's about liberation." The human strategy had evolved beyond military engagement. They were conducting a form of systemic liberation that defied traditional concepts of warfare. Each quantum-entangled communication node introduced not just disruption, but the concept of individual agency. Across Viridian-controlled star systems, subjugated civilizations began to notice subtle changes. Communication networks that had once been strictly controlled started to show unexpected variations. Isolated planetary systems found themselves with unprecedented access to information. Dr. Marcus Chen explained the theoretical framework to the assembled team. "We're not just breaking their communication system," he said. "We're introducing a conceptual virus of individual potential." The breaking point came not with a massive explosion, but with a series of increasingly complex communication anomalies. Viridian vessels began to make decisions that defied their core programming. Strategic units started to question the fundamental assumptions of their mission. Major Harper understood the deeper strategy. "We're not conquering them," he observed. "We're giving them the ability to conquer themselves." The Galactic Consortium watched in growing amazement as the most dominant civilization in known space began to experience what could only be described as a collective existential awakening. The rigid hierarchical structure that had maintained Viridian supremacy for millennia was revealing its fundamental weakness. Ambassador Krellmax's final transmission captured the essence of the transformation. What began as a report of strategic failure became something else entirely, a moment of genuine self-reflection. "We have misunderstood," the transmission read, "the nature of potential." Across multiple star systems, Viridian communication networks began to fragment. But it wasn't destruction. It was evolution. Subjugated civilizations that had long been under Viridian control began to receive unprecedented levels of communication. Information flow that had been tightly controlled for generations suddenly became unpredictable, dynamic, alive. Dr. Rodriguez watched the holographic display, a subtle smile playing across her lips. Humanity hadn't just challenged a galactic civilization. They had introduced the concept of true potential. The 72-hour countdown was almost complete, but the real transformation was just beginning. Humanity had done more than resist. They had reimagined the very concept of resistance. The Galactic Consortium's central chamber had never witnessed such a profound moment of transformation. Representatives from over 200 sentient species gathered, watching as humanity took its first official steps onto the interstellar diplomatic stage. Dr. Elena Rodriguez stood at the center of the chamber, not as a conqueror, but as something far more dangerous, a catalyst of change. "We're not here to replace one hierarchical system with another," she addressed the assembled representatives. Her words, translated across multiple communication spectrums, carried a weight that transcended language. "We're here to introduce a new way of understanding potential." The aftermath of the conflict with the Viridian Collective was unlike any previous galactic transition. Humanity hadn't destroyed a civilization. They had fundamentally reimagined its potential. Major Jack Harper stood nearby, a living embodiment of the strategic brilliance that had redefined interstellar conflict. The military strategists from various civilizations studied him with a mixture of respect and cautious fascination. Dr. Marcus Chen presented the technical overview, a masterpiece of communication theory that was part scientific exposition, part philosophical revelation. The quantum communication disruption they had introduced wasn't just a tactical maneuver. It was a comprehensive system of potential liberation. The Matherian Cooperative, long subjugated survivors of Viridian control, were the first to truly understand the depth of what humanity had accomplished. Their representative, Zorakal, approached Dr. Rodriguez with a gesture of respect that transcended traditional diplomatic protocols. "You did not conquer," Zorakal communicated, her molecular communication implant conveying nuanced meaning. "You awakened." The transformation of the Viridian collective was ongoing. What had been a monolithic hierarchical civilization was now a dynamic, evolving system. Individual units, once purely functional components, were discovering the concept of individual agency. Lieutenant Zara, the former Viridian communications officer who had first encountered human communication strategies, now stood as a representative of a rapidly changing civilization. Her presence alone was a testament to the profound change humanity had introduced. The underground research facility that had been the crucible of this transformation was now being opened to galactic scientific collaboration. It wasn't a military installation anymore. It was a center of potential, a place where different species could come together to reimagine technological and social possibilities. "We're not offering a solution," Dr. Rodriguez explained during the initial diplomatic sessions. "We're offering a method of continuous adaptation." The human approach was fundamentally different from previous galactic powers. They weren't interested in conquest or control. They were interested in potential, in the continuous evolution of understanding. Major Harper's final report to the United Nations captured the essence of their approach. "Our greatest weapon was never technology. It was the ability to see beyond existing limitations." As the first official human diplomatic mission concluded, the galactic community understood something profound. Humanity wasn't just another species entering the interstellar stage. They were a fundamental reimagining of what was possible. The 72-hour countdown that had started the conflict was over, but humanity's true journey was just beginning.